Today, what we're going to be learning about are annotations. For some of you, you've done annotations in the past, and this might be kind of old hat to you, but a few of us might be new to what annotations are, or maybe just what my expectations, Miss Robbins, are for you when you annotate a text. So before we dive into some specifics, I just want you to take a moment and look at a couple pictures of annotations. Just look at what's on the page. Notice the features that are present. If you're like me, I'm noticing like there's numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Things are underlined. There's some arrows. There's literally words on this text. There's sometimes short notes, sometimes longer notes. Here is another feature. We have some things that are circled. We have notes to the side, arrows. And so these are kind of what annotations sort of look like, and hopefully you notice some of these features. So the next question you might be asking yourself, if you don't know already, is what exactly are annotations? The technical definition to annotate is down here, right here at the bottom. And here's the definition: to add notes to a text or diagram giving explanation or comment. So that's the definition from the dictionary. So I sort of simplify it into these 3 bullet points of what it means to me. Number 1 is thinking about it as just literally writing on the text, like you're putting pen to paper, you're, putting notes literally on a text. Part 2, what I think about is talking to a text or having a conversation. When you annotate a text, it moves from like a one-way conversation, from you just reading and absorbing what the author is saying. Instead, you're sort of like talking back to the text. You're giving your feedback, your comments, your questions. You're stating what you're confused about, which kind of leads to number 3. Annotations help us construct meaning, to figure out literally sometimes if it's a difficult text to understand, what the text means, but also sort of shaping our own interpretation or understandings or belief about the text. So for these 3 reasons, or for these 3 things, I think annotations are really important. But we might be asking ourselves, why should we annotate a text? One reason why I assign annotations and I practice annotations myself is that it forces readers to slow down and make a sense of a text. A lot of people when you have a reading assignment, you kind of just race through it, almost like you're trying to get it done. By making annotations, you really have to stop and think about what you're reading and questions you have and things that confuse you. And so if you're one of those people who you can read a page and have no recall of what you've just read, annotating is one way to kind of stop that process, because it kind of forces you to slow down and make sense of what it says. The second thing is that it provides an opportunity to dialogue with the writer and add your own commentary. So instead of you just having to listen to what a writer says, this gives you an opportunity to sort of have a conversation with the writer, to express your opinion. So if you're reading something, and for instance, let's just say you strongly disagree with what the writer is saying, put that in your notes, and that kind of gives you fuel for conversations for later, because it's perfectly acceptable to disagree or to have problems with what you're reading. Third thing is that it preserves notes that you can reference later. This is really important in my class. For instance, if we're doing Socratic seminars, if you've made annotations about a text, it'll make it easy to find stuff that stood out to you, that you have something to say about it. And so this really helps anytime you're doing something for a school assignment and you know you're going to have to talk about it later or write about it later, which kind of brings us to the last reason why I assign annotations. It allows you to find areas to dig deeper into the meaning of a text. So maybe you do have to write an essay about something in a text that you're reading. Annotations really kind of point out or highlight those areas that you can really go deeper and think about more. Whenever I was in college, I would do annotations for just this reason. I'd find ideas or topics or sections of things that interested me, because I knew I wanted to research those more later or think about those more later. So if you have an assignment related to the text, this is another great reason to annotate. Something I wanted to point out is that there are a lot of different methods to annotate. I'm going to go through some quickly and then kind of point out what's important to me. Some people really are into color coding, like this helps them make sense of a text. You can see here somebody is highlighted in different colors and then they have their sort of key over here about what these different colors mean. This is perfectly acceptable and I know this works really well for some people. I do have to say personally I'm not a color coding person, so it's not something I employ, but if that helps you, then use it. Something else a lot of people do when they annotate a text is to use symbols as like little shortcuts or things to help them kind of know what they were thinking about. I do this a lot and I don't use all of these symbols, but I know when I'm annotating a text, for instance, anything that's like a key point, I will underline. I do circle things that I find kind of confusing. So you can use some of these symbols or make up your own, whatever works for you. The next one is, this is using post-it notes on a text. We will do this a little bit in my class, but this is really great, for instance, if you have a book that you're not supposed to write in. I know this is a bad example because I wrote in this book here, but if you have a book and you want to make annotations, I did this in college sometimes when I had to return a book. It wasn't mine to keep, but I wanted to take notes, so I would write my notes on a post-it note, stick it in the book, and it was there to reference later. The last one is the one I am going to assess you on, and we are going to practice in this class. It is writing in the margin. So you can see over here this person is taking notes on what they're thinking. There's complete thoughts here. It's a little bit deeper, like these circles and underlines are showing some reading and thinking, but this is kind of more developed thoughts. So what you do need to kind of practice is figuring out what system of annotating a text works best for you. I will say writing in the margins is one that I'm going to mandate and assess because that's one that can really clearly show me your thinking, your thought process, that you're, really thinking thoughtfully and meaningfully and you're engaging with the text. So how I sort of assess this is, I just want to do this by way of example. Look at these annotations. Notice we have some underlining, highlighting, some arrows, some question marks, but look at these annotations. I agree, good point. Now, there's nothing inherently bad or wrong about doing this, but as your teacher, when I see this, I'm not seeing a lot of deep thinking or thought going on. I mean, you could almost write this anywhere in a text and kind of get away with annotating. So I need to see, a little more heft. This, for example, this is a real example from a student. I took a picture of this. You can see they made two annotations. The first one says, "It makes sense." The second one says, "This would make a cool game." There's nothing inherently wrong about these annotations, but as a teacher, this doesn't really help me. Doesn't really show me that you're really thinking deeply about a text. You might be, but I just don't quite have the evidence. So what I'm going to ask you to do is to think about how you can add more heft to your annotations, more meat, to make them stronger and better. So for instance, here's an example from a student from last year. You can see they do kind of have some of the color coding system going on here, but I have complete thoughts going on. I like that the author decided to use this comparison. It shows that Leonard was frightened and shocked by seeing the car and light, that he was drawn toward it because he had never seen anyone else at night before. He was afraid and curious at once. I see real thinking going on. I see a student here trying to make sense of a text. Here's another student. Kind of different from the last one. You can see their annotations are shorter, but there's more. This one only has 2. This one has 4. They kind of have some arrows and highlighting that worked for them. That's not a mandate. But let's just look at some of their annotations. It says, "Why does he imagine himself somewhere else?" I think it is because walking around the same place gets boring. I really like this annotation because not only did they ask a question of the text, but they also kind of tried to answer it. They didn't have to write a big long paragraph, but I can really see a thought process going on. I do have a few recommendations as you start to do your own annotations. These are some sort of strategies you can use to help you make stronger annotations. You can ask a question, you can make a connection, a prediction, you can clarify, reflect, and evaluate. So a question is pretty easy. You can ask a question of the text, but make sure, just like that last example, you attempt to answer it. So like, for instance, I wonder why they move so much. There should be a question mark there. Maybe they moved because they didn't have a lot of money and got kicked out of their house. So, there's a question, there's an attempted answer. That's a good use of a question as an annotation. You can also make a connection between what you've read. Maybe it's your own life, maybe it's a text, a movie, a book, a song, or it can be something going on in the world. Maybe it's something in the news. But make sure you make clear you explain your connection. So for instance, at this one, here's their annotation. It says they're making a connection, a personal connection about a house and a yard. It says at my old house, we had to share a yard with 2 of our neighbors. It was okay most of the time, but it was frustrating not to be able to use your yard whenever you wanted. So they're making a personal connection. This helps them understand and empathize with the author in this one. The next strategy you can practice for stronger annotations is to make a prediction. You kind of anticipate what will occur based on what's in the passage, but again, make sure you explain why you made that prediction. For instance, here's one. It's a pretty long one. It says, I predict that they will have to move out of the house on Mango Street. That right there is the prediction. Now let's see why they made it. It is clear they don't have a lot of money because they've already moved around a lot. Also, they have a big family. They have 6 people. Big families are expensive to support. So they not only made that prediction, they also kind of explained it. Clarifying, this kind of happens later on. Maybe you asked a question earlier in in your annotations, and you get to another point and they've sort of answered your questions, or you have more information, and so you might make an annotation that sort of goes back to that. The next one is to kind of reflect, to think deeply about what the passage means, in a broad sense, not just to the characters in the story or the people in the text. So thinking bigger picture, what are some conclusions you can draw about the world, about human nature, just about the way things work? You can also think about the author's style, how that adds to the text, how that shapes the meaning of the writing. So let's look at this one. Wow. This author is able to convey a lot of meaning through very simple dialogue. The fact that the word there is in italics shows that it was said with a disparaging tone. Later in the text, the tone she uses in this dialogue leads the narrator to feel ashamed. So here I'm sort of reflecting on the author's style. I'm talking about how this use of simple dialogue has a really big impact on the text. Another important strategy we sort of have in our annotation tool belt is to evaluate a text. You can see my note here sort of says to make a judgment about the character or the characters, about their actions or what the author is trying to say, or just about the text in general. This is sort of where you give your opinion, your thoughts, your responses, and really evaluate or make specific judgments. So for example, in this text, you can see this annotation over here says, the ending of this chapter shows that the main character is determined to make something of herself. She doesn't want to live a life of poverty and always live there. As we begin reading this, I have a lot of respect for this character because she is driven and motivated. So this last part is getting to the evaluation. You have respect for these reasons, her drive and her motivation, which I sort of elaborated on up here. I do want to emphasize, don't stress about these labels. When I grade annotations, I'm not thinking, oh, did they make a connection? Was there a clarification? I'm really thinking, are they showing me a lot of deep reading? Some readers rely a lot on just asking questions and answering them, and I see a lot of deep thought through that. I know a lot of readers just like to kind of reflect and think big picture, what is this meaning? So don't stress about these labels. Remember, your goal is ultimately to give me some annotations that look something like this, that I can see that you're thinking and that you're thoughtfully engaging with the text. And that's how to be successful annotating in my class.